This narrated lecture is on the terminology related to Chapter 12. Many people find this terminology challenging, so let's take a few minutes to clear things up. Let's get started with sex and gender. Sex tends to be used in a biological sense, as it refers to our bodily makeup and reproductive capacity. Sex is designated at birth based on one's primary sex characteristics, which include our sex organs, both internal and external, as you can see here. Secondary sex characteristics come on with the onset of puberty. You can see many examples here. If a baby is born with primary sex characteristics that are not easily classified as male or female, the child could be designated as intersex. Feel free to pause and review this slide and the next to understand more about the cultural acceptance of intersex, which varies widely from intolerance to acceptance, as you can see in these examples. Now, switching gears, let's talk about gender. Gender refers to the personal traits and social positions that members of a society attach to being men and women. We know that gender isn't simply a biological aspect of ourselves because different cultures or different time periods offer varying expectations of how men and boys, women and girls ought to behave. We look to society to understand these standards. This is a list of gender expectations that a previous class developed. Though they might just seem like old-fashioned stereotypes, many people feel as though they are expected to perform some of these qualities and even face disapproval from those around them if they're not followed. We are often taught from a very young age through a process called socialization that these standards exist, even in subtle ways, such as the toys that we're given when we're younger. Gender identity refers to your internal knowledge of your gender. For example, your knowledge that you're a man, a woman, or another gender. Likewise, one's gender expression is the act of, quote, doing gender. In other words, it's how someone outwardly displays their gender. This is important because this distinction isn't always straightforward. It's not always the case that someone can openly or freely exhibit their gender identity, especially if they live or work in a space where people view gender only as a binary of two categories. When someone's sex and gender identity align, that person is labeled as cisgender. When someone's gender identity or expression is different from the sex that they were assigned with at birth, that person may be transgender, gender fluid, non-binary, or genderqueer. As you can see here, and feel free to pause, we are not the only culture that recognizes a variation of gender. Now, skipping forward, sexual orientation is another concept. Many times people confuse or combine the concepts of gender and sexual orientation together, so it's good for us to separate them. Sexual orientation refers to a person's romantic and emotional attraction to another person. Gender and sexual orientation are related because we generally use one's gender to determine what sexual orientation category someone falls into. For example, if someone's a woman and they're romantically attracted to someone who's a man, we label that person as heterosexual. If she's attracted to a woman, we label that person as homosexual or gay. If she's attracted to someone who are women and men, we label that person as bisexual. Just like sex and gender have more recently been discussed as existing on continuums, so has sexual orientation. Alfred Kinsey introduced the Kinsey scale in the 1930s as part of his research into human sexuality. He interviewed tens of thousands of individuals about their sexual histories and found that people had experiences that didn't fit nicely into only straight or only gay categories. Instead, he developed a continuum that more accurately measured sexual orientation. Further, we want to designate asexuality as well, or persons who do not experience sexual attraction or do not wish to engage in sexual behavior. You can see that this further is subcategorized as romantic asexuality and aromantic asexuality. To review, we can use the handout from the Trans Student Educational Resource, the Gender Unicorn. As you can see, those continuums are related, but all of these terminologies are distinct.